there! I'm literally the devil, and I'm here to introduce you to a product that we've been cooking up for the last 360 million years. This is coal. Now, I know it doesn't look like much, but we couldn't be prouder of the death and destruction that it's already brought to the planet that it's buried on. The smooth apes have taken to coal as naturally as they did to our other misery-making releases like Pointy Stick Chrome, and of course, coin. Yeah, I know. We all love coin, but coal is the real deal. Since the 1700s, those hairy bipeds have been burning enough of the stuff to make hell look like the Holiday Inn. Now, those of you who are familiar with our product will say, Lucifer, hasn't coal already had its day? And that only shows you that our propaganda departments are doing their job right. Thanks to our above-ground partners like Glencore and the Chinese Communist Party, shout out Big Xi, humanity is now burning more coal than it ever has done. But getting to this point hasn't been easy. No, we've had to suffer through centuries of increasing human comfort to get here. The coal production process began nearly 360 million years ago, during the Carboniferous period, a time where not a single human soiled the planet, and the dry parts were ruled by funky-looking amphibians and gigantic plants. There's me in my college years. I was still finding my feet and burning a whole bunch of green. These prehistorical plants grew and died in swampy bog areas and sunk below the soil, depriving them of oxygen and preserving their lifetime of accumulated sunlight and carbon. And the gradual downward movement of soil formed vast, veiny plant graveyards deep underground, eventually transforming them into a dark brown muddy substance called peat. After a couple 100 million years, pressure from sedimentary rock and high temperatures slow cooks that peat into the coal we burn and breathe today. Despite what some scientists or experts might say, coal is really the first green energy. It's 100% plant-based, and if you think about it, it's really just vintage solar power. See what I did there? If you just shamelessly shuffle words around, you can make them mean anything. This is what the American Coalition for Clean Coal Electricity, or AHA, spent $38 million doing in 2008 with their Clean Coal campaign. In this ad, the coal industry's best stock footage scientists looked thoughtfully at various coloured liquids, and we were introduced to the American coal industry's best catchphrase.
A commitment to clean. Learn more about clean coal at americaspower.org.
Later, the industry plunged to dirtier depths with this seasonal minstrel show designed to convince kids and smooth-brained adults that clean coal was a Christmas miracle.
For when they looked for pollutants, there was nearly none to see. Oh, Frosty the coal man is a jolly happy soul. He's abundant here in America, and he helps our economy roll.
But much like Santa or White Jesus, clean coal was entirely theoretical. So they paid a load of actors to believe in it hard enough, so maybe you would too.
I believe that meeting a challenge
brings out the best in us.
I believe we can use American energy resources.
I believe
We can be energy independent. We can continue to use our most abundant fuel cleanly and responsibly. We will. Clean coal.
The problem with this campaign is that clean coal is an obvious oxymoron, even to the most oxygen-deprived moron. It's hard to convince anyone it's clean when it looks like a Hangover shit and it leaves miners looking like they've just auditioned for a jazz singer remake. The science behind clean coal is based on carbon capture storage technology, which didn't exist when these ads aired and is still a practically and financially unviable solution. It doesn't clean coal or its emissions, that's impossible. It just captures the carbon emissions with the hopes that they can be crammed back under the Earth's crust, where hopefully people will forget about it. Still, with enough money and repetition, even the most nonsensical catchphrase can be lodged tumor-style into the minds of the geriatrics who occupy America's fanciest assisted living facility.
Look, Barack and I believe that clean coal is part of our energy future, a necessary part, and also a great export capacity.
Clean coal, meaning they're taking out coal, they're going to clean it.
Clean coal, right? Clean coal. Clean
beautiful coal.
While bullshit catchphrases can trick those who are enfeebled by age or corrupted by campaign donations, most people are harder to fool. If you want them to like something that is objectively bad for them, you can't focus on their logic center. You have to attack their emotions and their desire for increased material comfort. This is some of the earliest surviving footage of the city of Pittsburgh in 1917. The footage has been colorized, and so has the air with the yellow tint of sulfur dioxide, one of coal's most toxic and stinkiest byproducts. We like to say that coal is bringing a little bit of hell to Earth, even down to the smell. This is London again, during the Great Smog of 1952, which killed as many as 12,000 people in just 5 days. And this is Beijing in 2021, where the air is so thick with coal emissions that breathing in technically counts as a little snack. But air pollution doesn't just make cities taste spicier. It is the third highest cause of death in the whole world, just behind high blood pressure and smoking, and just above obesity. Shout out to our consumables department, tobacco and high fructose corn syrup. You guys are killers, literally. Fossil fuel air pollution contributes to 11.65% of all deaths globally. That's just under 7 million people in 2019 alone. But for the developing countries where most of these deaths occur, coal burning is the best shortcut to industrialization. All it takes is the deaths of several 100,000 of their city-dwelling citizens. I know we all miss the high drama of a blood sacrifice, but this method is more efficient. Back in the 16th century, London was literally running out of trees. As the population soared, so did the demand for wood to heat homes, cook food, and make tools. So it wasn't long before the forests surrounding the British capital were capable of producing about as much wood as a eunuch on a porn set. In the midst of this post-medieval energy crisis, the British became the first nation to make use of their abundant coal deposits. These little black rocks might have made people's homes grimy and their lungs slimy, but it was a lot easier to transport than wood and had much higher energy density. By the next century, Britain had learned to love coal. It kept their hovels hot, and it kept their peasants economically efficient. The famous London fog wasn't actually a natural phenomenon. It came entirely from the collective smoke of coal burning. By the middle of the 18th century, any British coal that was close to the surface had already been burnt up and breathed in. To get more of it, mines had to be dug deeper underground where they were at greater risk of flooding. To solve this problem, a churchy type named Thomas Newcomb invented the first ever rudimentary steam engine to pump water out of the flooded mines. While he must have been very pleased with himself, this provincial preacher would never know that his piston-powered water sucker was probably the most impactful single human invention of all time. It was soon in use across Britain, allowing people to get more coal than ever before. But more crucially, it was the basis for every steam engine that followed it. Between 1842 and 1856, the number of coal mines in Britain quadrupled as the industrial cities that ran on their product flourished. Without the steam engine, there would have been no factories. Without factories, there would be no industrial revolution. No global supply chain, no mass production, and no electricity. This means no iPhone to watch this video on, no gamer chair to fester in, and no cushy office job to pay for it all. No steam engine means no trains, means no cars, means no bell ends on those electric unicycle things probably, and no airplanes means no international travel. Which is to say, the steam engine and the coal that powered it kick-started the product-packed, comfortable life that soft-handed modern humans find just about bearable. Without coal, your life would be harder, darker, and much, much shorter. And you might say, Lucifer, buddy, why have you made a product that's improved so many lives that were once guaranteed to be miserable? Well, like any deal with me, it always comes with an ironic catch. I'm gonna live forever, I can play the long game. A few centuries of increasing human happiness is a small price to pay for the worldwide calamity that coal has already set in motion. The Industrial Revolution made Britain the most powerful nation on Earth, a trick that every subsequent superstate has carbon copied. See what I did there? Anyway, coal creates the conditions for the modern world. But in doing so, it also creates the conditions for its own redundancy. After half a dozen or so generations of living it good on machine-aided labour, wealthy countries start to get picky about where they get their energy from. Populations become literate and class-conscious, awake to the fact that coal is bad for them and that working in a factory fucking sucks. While real scientists who observe quantitative data rather than Fanta in a test tube realise that the Earth is getting hotter and that fossil fuel emissions are to blame. And they also realise that every other energy source, including the gross sticky ones, produce fewer carbon emissions than coal. Now, coal mining has always sucked. It might be the only job in existence where you have a pretty good chance of getting killed by earth, water, fire, and the air. The Wikipedia page for coal mining disasters is great bedtime reading if you find comfort in hearing about people dying much more horrific deaths than you probably will. But misery breeds camaraderie. Coal mining communities have always been tightly knit and fiercely defensive of their traditional way of living and dying in a dank pit.
If you know what a coal mine looks like, get a job in Britain's modern mining industry and get more out of life.
Hey there, miner, living life the way you want it to be. Come on now, miner, there's money, lots of money and security.
In this terrifically kitsch ad from the 1970s, the National Coal Board of Britain tried to convince viewers it wasn't just BBC presenters that were out to fuck as many miners as possible.
Today, they're hoping to get more out of Northumberland and Durham's massive coal resources, and getting more out of life at the same time. There are vacancies for skilled and unskilled workers.
But thanks to decades of mechanisation, there are far fewer coal jobs than in its child labour heyday. Today, the industry isn't so concerned with recruiting as it is with defending its God-given right to flick the world's thermostat into the red. Which is why the Lignite Energy Council of America have been trying to reach the minds that haven't yet been corrupted by the toxic fumes of reality, by smuggling coal industry propaganda into classrooms.
Well, my cousin says that coal creates pollution and wrecks the environment.
That's wrong. We learned in class the other day that emissions from the coal-based energy decreased like 83% since the 1970s.
Local taxes on coal mines in Wyoming and North Dakota directly fund public schools, a batshit bureaucratic decision that directly ties school budgets to an industry in decline. This is why the Lignite Energy Council so graciously hosts an annual education seminar for the state's teachers, handing out professional development credits as well as lesson plans, classroom resources, and literal pieces of coal to share with the kids. Now, adults can be taught to love coal too. You just have to trick them into thinking that it's responsible for everything they know and love.
I grew up in a small town and I love that lifestyle where Main Street looked like a Norman Rockwell painting, everybody knew your name. Coal gave me the American dream that I never thought I'd have.
It's in the American industry's interest to sustain the stereotype that coal provides hundreds of thousands of honest working class jobs. In reality, fewer than 70,000 people work in coal mines in the USA. In comparison, the solar industry employs over 250,000 Americans, and it doesn't demand that they spend 12 hours a day underground inhaling cancer dust. Most of the time though, coal miners aren't really attached to their jobs, they're attached to their communities. Which is why the industry has to resort to growing their own grassroots. Besides cryptids and OxyContin, the Appalachian Mountains are probably best known for being crammed with coal. Nowhere in America is better associated with the black stuff. And if lobbying groups like the NMA or the WVCA have their way, That's how it's gonna stay. These lobbying groups, though, are smart enough to make sure that their seedy money is spread far away from the roots of the corporate cash tree. They covertly pay local marketing firms to create separate organizations like Count on Coal or the ubiquitous Friends of Coal. These astroturfing campaigns are usually easy to unpack, like in 2009 when the Faces of Coal campaign was found to be faking their faces in their marketing material, using stock photos instead of real Appalachian folks. But snotty liberal types tend to misunderstand what the real purpose of astroturfing is. They like to think it's about tricking the wider public so that they can congratulate themselves for seeing through it. The real point of this kind of astroturfing is not to stand in for authentic grassroots sentiment. It's there to ignite it when there is already disorganized discontent. Coal really is part of the air they breathe in Appalachia, which might account for their sexy, smoky accents.
They enjoyed it. I mean, you know, they had just living high on the hog, as you should say.
The industry was the main economic force that started and sustained its first communities, and these places have seen their jobs cut in half in just a decade. So when the corporate ventriloquists over at Friends of Coal showed up and said that coal keeps the lights on, there were a lot of real people who related to and repeated this sentiment. In Kentucky and West Virginia, this phrase is commonplace. You see it in sporting arenas and on bumper stickers everywhere, even on the odd Tesla, which is hilarious. It even reached the hallowed grounds of America's Got Talent in an absolute banger that I am still not entirely sure wasn't an ingenious industry plant.
Where are you from?
I'm from Pineville, Kentucky. I'm a 4-year United States Marine Corps veteran.
Coal keeps the lights on. My hometown keeps the food on the spoon in my youngin's mouth.
But the thing about coal jobs in Appalachia is that they started to decline for the same reason they did in Britain in the 1980s. Governments realised that it was bad for the environment and people's health, so they retrained coal miners to... no, I'm only kidding. It was the profit motive. Jobs in the industry have been declining long before people even knew climate change was a thing, as machines were replacing men in the mines as early as the 1960s. When Britain struck North Sea oil in the 1980s and America started extracting natural gas from the Appalachian Basin in the 2000s, both countries didn't need coal quite as much. And they really don't need it in America. If the Appalachian Basin was a standalone country, it would be the third largest natural gas producer in the world, just behind the whole rest of America and Russia, which we'll get back to. Natural gas also happens to produce 40% fewer carbon emissions than coal, but that's really by the by. The point is, you don't need an army of soot-faced miners to extract natural gas. So while its energy is cheaper and marginally greener, it doesn't create as many jobs. The modern mechanized coal industry doesn't create many either, but the old traditional coal industry united Appalachian communities long before we pumped OxyContin into them and tore them apart. By 2016, the 4 largest coal mining companies in the USA were facing Chapter 11 bankruptcy because of a declining appetite for their product and a little bit of mismanagement as well. You know, these guys were chugging the profits while they could. Who can blame them? Still, the enormous success of the coal industry's astroturfing campaign were plain to see. It wasn't coal's fault that the jobs went away. The poor little rock was a victim of a wider cultural war on family, small-town values, and college football, probably. This sediment-based sentiment is now so widely felt in these northwestern states that the only politicians with a chance of winning them are the ones that look best in a mining helmet. In other words, the astroturf grew roots and became real grass. For a lot of Australians, climate change isn't really a big deal. Most of the country is already a lifeless desert where only the most craven and disgusting scavengers can survive. And one of those creatures is Gina Rinehart, the richest woman in Australia and its single largest landowner. When the wicked bitch of Western Australia isn't running its largest coal mining business, she is giving speeches to school children on how climate change is totes not real.
Rationale should ask,
Why does the media in general and those they influence now call for reducing carbon? Indeed, importantly, as we are overwhelmed by media and propaganda today.
And for the last decade, she's been pumping her considerable profits into a free market think tank called the IPA, a trusted institute in Australia because, well, its acronym reminds them of beer. But the IPA's main reason for existing is to smuggle pro-coal and anti-environment talking points into Australian culture, mainly through the corporate interest feeding tube of Sky News.
Tell you what, Daniel, thank God for the IPA. I mean, these are exactly the sort of hard facts that have gone missing in the whole climate debate.
Well, you know, on this show we live in the real world, and here's the real world. James Morrow wrote today about a report which came out from the IPA.
People, those voters that got them into government, the voters that swung to them in regional Queensland, that are going to be the ones that are going to...
The IPA would have you believe that coal is the backbone of the Queensland economy. Though as of 2021, there are only about 37,000 employees across the entire industry. And most of these employees are inner city elites, rather than miners in the down under of the down under. Which hasn't stopped BHP, the second biggest coal company in the world, from representing themselves as an outback mom and pop store that's as Australian as dingo shit in a didgeridoo.
It's as true today as it was 130 years ago, when 7 ordinary men gathered on a small, parched plot of ground near Broken Hill and dared to think big.
The Swiss-owned Glencore might sell $1 billion of Australian coal to a Chinese steel mill, but there's no reason that any ordinary Australians will see a buck of that outside of the income tax on their employees. What coal does provide Australia with is energy. In the year 2000, 80% of Australia's energy came from coal. Over the last 20 years, the country has invested heavily in renewables like solar, but coal still provides about 50% of Australia's energy. Unlike the tiny, rain-ridden nations of Europe, Australia has tons of sun and plenty of unoccupied land, so it's uniquely placed to take advantage of solar power. But you wouldn't know that if you get your news from Chris Kenny, a Sky News presenter who sucks Glencore's dick like he expects their jizz to taste like cupcakes.
Glencore, advancing energy, advancing everyday life.
That's an ad for Glencore, one of our largest coal miners. They're advertising on this station, and I took an interest in this before I knew they were advertising here. Joining me now is Cass McCarthy, who's Glencore's Head of Corporate Affairs. Thanks for joining us, Cass. First up, for the main point, telling people about what the mining industry does to support all parts of the economy and get power to people across the country. Are you disappointed you have to do that? I mean, I would have thought kids would learn that in school, right?
And this is Glencore we're talking about. Not just a mining company, but a commodity trading granddaddy and some of the most evil fucks who've ever walked the earth. And I mean that as a compliment. Now, I can't go into all of Glencore's diabolical achievements. We'll be here all day. Maybe some lazy, buck-toothed British know-it-all should get off his arse and make a video about them. But to summarise, Glencore was founded by the aptly named Mark Rich, a man who made billions doing the thankless task of delivering commodities to clients that no one else would do business with. Clients like apartheid South Africa, Saddam Hussein, and Iran during the 1979 hostage crisis. Besides making deals with dictators, commodity traders mostly spend their days gambling with the world's essential resources. They make their money in the same way that stock traders do. They buy up as much of these resources as possible when the price is low and then sell when the price goes up. It's a way to make a ton of money on coal without having to get your hands dirty, at least not in the literal sense. And the guys at Glencore spied the mother of all opportunities in the late 1990s to get their hands on as much coal as possible. In 1997, the United Nations got together to do what they do best: sign documents and then applaud one another after a long, hard day of document signing. 37 countries and the whole European community agreed to clench and hold in some of their greenhouse gases for the good of the world. The UK agreed to hold back 13% of its emissions. Germany did one better and agreed to a 21% reduction in greenhouse gases. While the American delegation couldn't even hold their food in, let alone their gases, and failed to ratify the protocol at all. Whether the states were involved or not, this was the first major global commitment to fighting climate change. Partly as a result, the price of coal slumped, and the industry became incredibly unprofitable for about 3 years. The fuel that built the modern world and simultaneously poisoned it looked set to be phased out completely. But one Glencore executive named Ivan Glassenberg saw things a little differently. Observing the rapid industrialization of countries that weren't bound by the limits set at Kyoto, over the next 4 years he bought more than a dozen mines in Australia and in his native South Africa. By the year 2000, Glencore was the world's largest shipper of thermal coal, trading 1 in 6 of every ton on the seaborne market. And it wasn't long before Glassenberg's bet on the money-losing coal industry turned out to be one of the best bets in the history of gambling. The European Union has been gagging on its carbon-reduced farts since Kyoto, smugly shaming any countries that still rely on coal to keep the lights on. Despite this, the world's carbon emissions have been steadily rising ever since, and it is now burning more coal than it ever has done. But how can this be, when the world's largest economies are committed to phasing the stuff out? The world's most self-righteous continent has reduced its carbon footprint and retained its lavish consumer lifestyle by exporting its coal burning to the new superpower on the block. That's right, China is coal country. The nation that first started burning coal was late to the industrialization game, but it's been playing a blinder for the last 30 years. After Deng Xiaoping announced that communist China was converting to cheat code communism in the 1980s, its grand industrial transition has made the British Industrial Revolution look like a snaggle-toothed caveman rubbing 2 sticks together, and it's all been powered by coal. While Europe was closing its coal mines, the CCP was digging enough holes in the ground to bury 1 billion hookers. And it has still had to import it from South Africa and Australia to satisfy the electricity demands of its factories and smog-ridden megacities. By the time it was hosting the Olympics, China was burning more coal than the entire rest of the world combined, rendering everyone's attempt to decarbonize completely pointless. And yet, Europe and America still find a way to tut their fingers at China, all while wearing, holding, and staring blankly into their China-made and coal-produced products. Their brains can't really handle the moral complexity of it, a glorious and grim irony that the entire industrialized world is complicit in. They are boiling alive in their own bathtub, and they are blaming the $10 kettle they bought to fill it up with. During the more recent document-signing jamboree of COP26, India, China, and other developing nations rejected a deal to shut down their coal-fired power stations. And who can blame them? They're extremely profitable, and they are saving millions from poverty. Still, China isn't completely ignoring its coal problem. They've invested heavily in hydroelectricity, and they are building dozens of nuclear power stations, both at home and abroad through the Belt and Road Initiative. And nuclear power might be the biggest threat to our plan for net zero humans by 2080. It is the one form of energy that basically produces 0 carbon emissions and has enough energy density to supply an industrial power. Luckily, nuclear is also scary as shit, and when times get tough, even Europe would rather crawl back to good old coal. So you might have noticed the whole Hell team has been working overtime in 2022. Societal collapse, double-figure inflation, and hey, maybe the opening act to World War III. And if you aren't looking closely, that whole Ukraine business might look like one man's short man complex finally reaching boiling point. But really, it's all about oil, gas, and coal. Putin has sent Russia's finest oafs to drink and die in eastern Ukraine now, because Russia's chokehold on Europe's energy supply has been slacking for the last decade. Germany is Europe's largest economy, because unlike some economically illiterate sea rocks, they sustained a lot of their traditional industry. But this also makes them Europe's biggest energy addict, and Russia's best customer. Since 2011, Germany has been guzzling Russian gas from the Nord Stream pipeline. And in doing so, they've been curbing the country's century-long coal habit. German politicians who aren't in Gazprom's pocket have been talking big game about going even greener and reducing Europe's overall dependence on Russian energy. So it was really now or never for Vladolf Putler's invasion of Ukraine, as his best economic weapon to wield over Europe is decaying faster than the actual weapons that he's given his conscripts. Because Germany's goody two-shoes energy turnaround plan is absolutely foolproof, because it's all about embracing renewables and entirely eliminating nuclear power. Wait, what? You see, Germany's tree-hugging Green Party was founded in the 1980s, fueled by a fear of nuclear weapons and the possibility of future Chernobyl-style face-melting incidents. Today, those self-righteous anti-nuclear teenagers are all grown up and in a coalition government, still so committed to shutting down Germany's carbon-free nuclear facilities that they'd rather bulldoze towns to make way for new coal mines. That's right, Germany, bow down before your real god. Today, this old-school anti-nuclear Cold War paranoia is working hand in hand with Vladimir Putin's revival of Cold War passive aggression. In reaction to European sanctions, Putin switched off the Nord Stream gas supply, sending Europe into an energy crisis. And then somebody blew it up. Probably unrelated, don't worry about it. Forcing Germany to dust off their old power stations and come back to good old coal. It now provides the country with over a third of its electricity. Look at it spin! And they aren't the only ones. England closed its last coal mine in 2020, but the European energy crisis has forced the country to keep its power stations running, keeping the black stuff alive in the country that first fully harnessed it 200 years ago, revealing the real inconvenient truth. That being snobby about coal and other fossil fuels was always a privilege of the countries that already built their wealth on top of them. The truth is, real power is concentrated among those who control the energy supply. There's a reason that power and energy basically mean the same thing. The war in Ukraine has wrought havoc on the world's energy market, but that has only been good news for the people who are holding coal. The Australian and South African coal barons have taken full advantage of its soaring price, as European buyers scramble for their supply. While Western governments put sanctions on Russian energy, Western commodity traders are facilitating the transport of Russian coal to India and China. Speaking of the world's largest coal furnace, they have really been feeling the heat this year, with their hottest, driest summer on record decimating their hydroelectric supply. China is making up for it by burning more coal. It now generates more electricity from it than America does from all sources. So the forecast is looking hot and hellish for everyone. Coal released enough energy to build the modern world, but it also holds enough to destroy it. Hey you, guy who just watched this video, do you like comic books? 'Cause I made one. It's a weird, gory, sci-fi prison comedy, and I think you'll really like it. If you want to know more, check out justordinarythings.com, where you can register your interest and become one of the first to get your hands on it. And if you're a patron of the channel, like these lovely people, then you can read the first 5 pages right now on Patreon. Alright, that's it. See you next time.